Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast for Backlot Banter, where we review every single Palme d'Or winner in random order. That's right. Today, we are talking about the 1992 winner, The Best Intentions, or as you Swedes might know it by, Den goda viljan.
Yeah, that's what everyone's been calling it on the streets.
This film, directed by Billy August, written by Ingmar Bergman, about one Henrik Bergman, who might or might not be old Ingmar's father.
Yeah. It's not a mystery.
Well, technically, Timo was correct because Ingmar Bergman's father was named Eric Bergman, not Heinrich Bergman.
Yeah, but he's definitely supposed to be his father. That's not a mystery.
Timo, you did not know how right you were. But
I
continue.
did. I was speaking wrongly, but accidentally being quite correct. We're going to talk about this film. I'm looking forward to it. It was a very long watch, but maybe that'll result in a very long conversation. Well, who knows? Last episode, we reviewed what we thought was a quite excellent film from British filmmaker Ken Loach in the film I, Daniel Blake. It got a 9.2 out of 10, which merit a spot number 2 on our list. I highly recommend you go watch that episode, and I'm just going to say it. I highly recommend you go watch that movie because it was very, very good, and we have lots of thoughts about it. Check it out. Card in the Corner. Now, Abram, did any lovely audience members of ours
lovely commenters?
Did they write us any letters or send us any telegrams in the past week?
They did. Our friend Raina left a comment, I believe, on the I, Daniel Blake episode, but I'm not reading that today.
Raina, you got it last week? We don't want the power to go to your head?
Yeah, the only person we read out multiple comments in a row is John Tor,
yes,
of course.
Definitely. Well, sometimes Dan's.
Sometimes Dan's.
Back in the good old days.
What happened to Dan's? Dan's got hop back on the horse here.
It's just I was shopping around here. I went over to the Archives channel, and I found a comment on our Tom Jones review that I thought was quite entertaining.
Okay.
All right.
This comes from The Cat Indeed, who says the following. I watched this movie today, but it was really boring, and I had no idea what the hell is going on, so I'm watching this Quest episode for a plot synopsis. Edit. Well, I didn't get much of a synopsis, but it's nice to know that I'm not alone in my confusion.
Oh, that's good. That's rich.
Thank you,
That's a
The
great
Cat Indeed.
comment.
Thank you.
Great.
The edit makes the whole thing.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. Tanner, would you, beyond what we said already about fathers and Bergmans, describe the plot of this here movie?
Timo, I'd be delighted to. So this film takes place in the early 20th century, early 20th century. And we are following the lives of one Heinrich Bergman and Anna Ångström, something like that.
I can spell it.
Okay.
I've got it
with the circle.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, he's got it.
Ackerstrom?
Timo's got it.
Acker.
Yeah.
Åkerbrom.
Åkerbrom.
Oh, that's exactly
It's
what I
like-
said.
Heinrich and
Åkerbloom.
Anna. Heinrich and Anna.
Heinrich and Anna.
They come from very different stratified social worlds. Anna is the daughter of a well-to-do family, and Heinrich is a blue-collar worker trying to work his way into the church. And they become smitten with one another. And over the course of about 5-10 years or so, they get married, they have a falling out, they move up to the North Country, and
Great White North.
the Great White North, and their differences come to a head. Their differences in opinion on how they should live, how they should operate their family, and ultimately it results in them splitting up. And towards the end of the film, they come back together because love triumphs all, does it not, gentlemen?
Well, in this movie, it's kind of hard to tell.
It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah.
This is written by Ingmar Bergman.
I don't think that is the moral of this story.
I don't think so. It's written by Ingmar Bergman, so it's going to have a bit of a, cold, emotionally distant, but somewhat sentimental heart to it yet. It's, Ingmar Bergman's a complicated gentleman, and here he is examining the roots of that complication with his family, his mother and father's young adulthood.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What did you guys think of this film? Tucker, why don't you lead us off?
I want to preface by saying I don't have any particular affinity for Ingmar Bergman. The only movies of his I've seen are Persona and Seventh Seal. Persona I did not care for. Seventh Seal I actually like quite a lot. I like that movie. So he's very hit or miss, and so I'm not like going into this like, oh man, can't wait to see where the master came from. But I found the film perplexing because I think it's well made, and I think that the dialogue good, and I really like the two main performances. I think that they are very charming. I think that they have great chemistry in both good and bad ways. in terms of whenever their personalities are either coming together or clashing. But this film is just so odd in that it's almost an anti-romance film, in that you think the characters are going to like each other, but then like one tiny little thing gets in between them, and then they just hate each other, and then that lasts for an undisclosed amount of time because we do a lot of jumping around. So I found this film compelling. I found it to be kind of whatever what Daniel Craig would say.
Sure.
He's like, it makes no damn sense. It compels me. The film makes sense, but it's a compelling film. But I think it is also confusing. But I think it's only because it's not doing what other films about romance do.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very tumultuous romance. It's still a romance. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a ultimately positive one, but that does make it distinct. And I think it's well made and well acted. I think it does go on too long. And I think that there's some areas where, because of the jumping around, it can be very confusing what's happening. But I still enjoyed it ultimately.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'll hop in next and say that enjoyed is maybe a strong word for me. I sat there and I watched this movie.
That's not a particularly strong word, by the way. So.
There's interesting things to think about. It is emotionally cold and distant. It's very long. I like living in Sweden. I'm just throwing my points at the wall here. But like this film, it is interesting, and our romance has, I think, a lot of merit to it. But I'm kind of, I don't know, a little bit left on the side. It's good. I could tell it's well made, and that there's, I don't think like the cinematography or the music like stands out, shouts at me.
Solid though.
But what does is these characters and this very realistic portrayal of a romance that doesn't go so well. And I think that seeing that in a film is something that's special and a little bit different, and one that like goes on a very interesting path and goes in ways that I wasn't really exactly expecting, and had a little bit of interesting themes to talk about. I think that this film dives into class a little bit, not a huge amount. It's kind of like our background issue that we don't want to actually talk about, but is clearly causing all the problems in these characters' lives. And so I could choose to be frustrated by that, but then I could also be like, this movie's just not trying to be about class. It's actually just trying to be about how these two lovers relate to each other.
From different classes.
And from different classes, a major part of their differences, but how they go about these challenges in an elongated sense of time. I think that the longer movie then also lets us, and lets me as an audience member be like, okay, we're gonna set up, and we're gonna maybe take like an hour and a half to set this story up, and then we're gonna have another hour of development of the plot, and then we'll get our resolution in the final half hour. And that pacing and length, while is not always that entertaining to me, I think like suits the story well.
Sure. Yeah. I'll weigh in and say that I feel somewhat similarly in that this film is well made. I think it is a good film. But at the same time, there's no really doubting that it is a long 3-hour sit. And even like the quite positive reactions I was scrolling through quickly on Letterboxd, like it'll be 4.5 stars and be like, this is the most boring Palme d'Or winner. Like it's just an open admission of that. I find it very interesting because it really brings to mind like, is being boring, truly a criticism?
Yeah.
Is it truly a bad thing, or is it really just your persuasion?
Yeah. It's also interesting that you think about Ingmar Bergman. Ingmar Bergman's best known movies are like 90 minutes to an hour 40.
Yes.
So this is a relatively rare thing for him. He does have some longer movies.
Of course. Well, he has, one that is very much in conversation with this, Fanny Alexander, is one of those longer ones. Also in conversation because it's an autobiographical film about him and his childhood. But anyway, to speak about, sort of my feelings on Bergman himself, I quite enjoy him as a filmmaker. I've only seen 6 or 7 of his movies, really enjoyed all of them, so I was quite interested to see what he had to say about his own emotional roots or, parentage here. I think it is quite interesting. On the note of class, because I think that is also, as you guys had mentioned, a large underscoring element of this film. I think it does actually talk about it quite a bit, just not in the ways that we often see class talked about, especially in more recent Palme d'Or winners, where it's like, here is the lesson you're supposed to take away about class conflict and class differences. It is just a very real element of the world that informs who our characters are, and they have very frank conversations about it. That is not like, and here's what we're talking about, and here's what Billy August or Ingmar Bergman's trying to say about class. It is just simply an element that is key to our characters and inherent to them. Clearly something that Ingmar Bergman was like, it was a big element of why my parents didn't get along and how they probably fucked me up a little bit because of their differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like this movie a lot, actually. I found it very captivating, and I found I found myself kind of like reconciling with the runtime as we go along, because it definitely is a lot to sit through, but I ultimately think that that's to the movie's benefit. I found myself at a couple key points, in some ways, and it's kind of like odd, but I don't know better phrasing for it, like almost grateful that it was the length that it was, because I felt like you really come to become so emotionally invested in both of our leads simply by merit of the amount of time you spend together. And by that merit, I think that because the script is so exceptional, I really found myself kind of lost in the world of the movie. I do agree that it I feel restless sitting through it, but I feel restless reading really good books too.
Sure.
So I on the whole, I have almost like a literary appreciation for it in some ways. I'm excited to get deeper into it.
I think that's a part where I kind of want to start with, is how similar this feels. This feels like a very literary work, in that I think just from the form of the film, it starts there. We really learn pretty much everything. Everything in this movie is driven by the dialogue between characters. Like, characters talk to each other, and that's where our romance comes from. That's where our conflicts come from. It's like the whole movie lives by our dialogue, and I think that in many, many scenes, we get these moments in which that just conversation between the two characters is so strong and is simultaneously about what's going on plot-wise, character-wise, about what these characters are feeling, but is also, I think, extrapolating and providing a bit of a larger message, or just an idea to chew on, which is something that my favorite books do, is where I'll be reading along, and then, what do you know? Yeah, we're discussing some plot thing, but we're really talking about the theme. We're really talking about something else, and I really enjoy that, and I felt that on a number of times in this, where I was like, this is kind of like reading a book, but it's watching the movie, and you see characters talk to each other. I think that there's a strange formal similarity between a longer novel and this film.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think a scene that exemplifies that for me, and to kind of bring in the point about class 10x, I actually agree with you that I feel like it's well situated in the narrative. I really like the scene where their relationship begins to fall apart when they're in the church and they're arguing about their wedding.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I think seated in that dialogue, and then we have them overtly speak about it, is this sort of irreconcilable class difference between them, in which Anna kind of ends the argument by angrily talking about how Henrik smells sometimes, and he won't.
Parasite.
Yeah,
Yes.
he actually, yeah,
Actually, yeah.
yeah, and he won't,
I wasn't joking.
he won't dress a certain way or whatever. I think this film does a really good job of allowing these thematic elements to bubble up in key moments, or critically allow the script to suppress them when is necessary. I think a scene like that pairs really nicely with a later scene, like after Petrus has tried to throw their child into the river.
Dog, their child dog.
Yes.
Their child dog.
We have this long exchange wherein, after Anna won't stop doing the dishes to talk to Henrik, and Henrik gets physical, she makes a remark in the drawing room or whatever to the effect of like, yes, we'll do whatever you want. I think there's a lot of resentment that the script builds for our characters and allows that to pop up at key moments for these flare-ups of tension. But I think the movie exists in this like perpetual state of unease.
Yeah, and I think that's because we get two main characters that have an affinity for each other, that appreciate each other's company in certain moments and are physically attracted to one another, but they're both very headstrong, easily offended, take a lot of shit. I lost my train of thought. They hold grudges. That's what I was
Okay, gotcha.
They hold grudges quite
Yes.
quite frequently. And there's always a little bit of frustration underscoring almost every single one of the things that they do. And what I think makes why it makes this film feel distinct, but also very uncomfortable, I would say, to watch, is when you do get the more lovey-dovey sequences where they are, skipping through the flowers or like sitting on a bench or snuggling,
They're
whatever.
in the nice, brightly lit Swedish countryside.
And those are present throughout the film.
Yeah.
But I always felt like when I was watching those that the characters were like hiding their feelings to try their best to like put on a facade of like
put on airs of being very romantic.
look how happy I am.
Yeah.
Look how much I'm willing
I
to like
getcha.
put aside my differences to be with you, because being together is the most important thing. Because the film vacillates pretty severely between being together is the most important thing, and we need to overcome family differences, class differences, space differences, getting a house, building ourselves into a community. We need to overcome all these things so we can be together. That is the most important thing. And then, like 4 or 5 times throughout the film, it is a bad thing that we are together. It is harming both of our lives. Our families do not like us because of this. Both of our mothers are having like visions of the future of this is like the worst thing to ever happen. And for many generations to come, we shall be cursed. And so
maybe Ingmar's trying to say something there.
yeah.
Interesting.
He's the result of a curse. But returning to why I think why that feels distinct is I never actually really believed the romantic moments of this film, because I always felt like there's lies here. There's a facade being put up, and at any moment that could come slipping down, and a slap could happen, or a physical altercation, or an insult that has been like waiting just below the surface. And so this film is about romance. But and I can't remember what film it was, but we talked about another film where I said it was about romance, but it wasn't. I can't remember.
Was
what
it Past Lives?
I think it was Past Lives. Yes. But the romance is almost there to placate the audience while we try to discuss the problems, interpersonal problems that people have. Because I think that's ultimately what this film is about having personality flaws that lead you to create conflict with other people, even the people you care about.
Yeah, sure. I'm not really sure entirely where to start here. I guess we probably start with talking about the performances of our two characters, Anna and Heinrich, and they are portrayed, of course, by, if you guys give me a second here, Samuel Frohler and Pernilla August.
Yeah.
Average moviegoers may be re-exposed to Pernilla August recently, as many people might recognize her as Shmi Skywalker from the prequel series.
Oh, interesting.
That's crazy, because I just saw the Phantom Menace re-release, and I was watching this movie like, where the fuck have I seen this film before?
You literally started 48 hours ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think they are both very strong, and I think ultimately, while they have similar issues, our characters have similar issues, they display them and are incongruous with one another for differing reasons. I mean, when we are introduced to Anna, she is obviously very headstrong, very much more outspoken than Heinrich is.
Yeah.
She openly, sort of flaunts or shoves off the demands or requests of her mother. There's a very funny conversation. I wrote down this exchange earlier where it's after Heinrich has stayed in their house for the first time, and her mom is like, "You were in his room last night. The servant heard you in the room in there." It's like, "What if you had gotten pregnant?" She's like, "Well, it's pretty difficult at that distance. But I would have slept with him if he asked me to." Like, she's just very upfront with her mother about these topics, and it's very interesting, especially given the setting of this film, to see those kinds of frank conversations happen. Heinrich, on the other hand, Samuel Frohler sort of has this. It's much more bubbling, this bubbling anger that Tucker had mentioned before, where he is much more reserved. There is a facade that he is putting on, and obviously towards the end of the film, the latter half of the film rather, that can come out in violent outbursts. But he's also a very complicated man. he's trying to help out these struggling workers by having them put up in the church, and then he's having this sort of underhanded, passive-aggressive disagreement with a man in the town by the name of
He's like
Nordston.
he's like the business owner.
Yes, so he's having all these different conflicts with his wife and with the people in his community, and he rejects this job offer from the Queen of Sweden because ultimately you have to ask yourself, why is he doing all these things? Why is he actively making his life worse? I think it comes in a final conversation where someone asks him about, these, or the Queen, I guess, the who I just mentioned, asks him about, why do you think misery exists? Do you think suffering? Why do you think God? Do you think God sort of makes us suffer to have us grow and flourish and appreciate things more? And he's like, no, God has nothing to do with suffering. That's all man-made stuff. We just have to endure it because that's how life is. And so it brings to mind this thing of like, is Heinrich sort of seeking out and making himself suffer? When Anna leaves, he is like, I'm at the edge of the world. I want to be alone.
Yeah.
I want to be by myself. And
he's saying that like that will like make him
it'll
sharper.
It'll sharpen me. It'll strengthen me.
Yeah.
And so you have to think like that's probably his mindset about things, that he is actively, either consciously or unconsciously, pushing away good or positive influences or people in his life.
There's an interesting moment when he first arrives to the northern town, and he's sitting at a dinner table with the other sort of elites of the town, and they're speaking about the workers' socialist revolution that's trying to unfold in the town, and the Nordstrom,
yeah,
Nordstroms.
he says something to the effect of, what, if this revolution happens, it's our heads that are going to roll. And I think that there's an interesting reading of Henrik's character where he almost has this sort of self-flagellation about him, perhaps even because in part of Anna. I think this idea that, he is pretty clearly at least sympathetic to the socialist cause. He's willing to harbor these people. He's willing to stand up to those who are trying to oppress them and garnish their wages and things. But he's also in this relationship with this hyper affluent woman, and he resents her affluence. There's this sort of recurrent idea that Frida, his past fiancée, who's a waitress, he can't escape this offhanded reaction Anna has to learning about her profession.
Yeah, I mean, towards the very beginning of the film, which is what initially sort of sets them apart. It's the first thing that glances them off of one another. Yeah. Is Anna's like, oh, she's a waitress, and he's like, well, why'd you say it with that tone?
I actually want to
that class conflict is inherent from the very beginning of the film.
I want to dive with this little difference between these two characters even farther to the very opening scene of the film, in which Henrik is confronted by his grandfather, and his grandfather is trying to make him reconnect and make up with his wife, the grandmother of the family. And eventually at the end of the scene, which I think this is a rather brilliant opening scene because it's really dumping you in the middle of this narrative, and it's giving you context, but it's boom, get started. And Henrik is like, no, I'm not gonna go do that. She never helped out my family when we were struggling. She only gave us these stupid little gifts that humiliated us. He has, I think, an actual class hatred deep within him as a result of this the events of his upbringing, in which his wealthier family essentially, it sounds like to me, refused to help him and his mother. And when eventually we go visit the mother, I think that trauma is really brought up and is really evident there, that the hard times, as they call them, that the hard times are over. But I don't, for Henrik and his family, maybe the hard times are never over. And for Anna and her family, they have never experienced hard times.
Yeah.
And so point. I think that is our central conflict between the characters. That is ultimately, like you say, they glance off each other right there at the beginning, but I think it is the thing that has them butting up against each other again. It's at the wedding. It's do we have a big wedding at the big cathedral, or do we have one at the small chapel? It's very, the class lines are drawn very clearly, I think, and you get to see how the characters react to all of that information. And I mean, even the religion plays into it very interestingly. That he is ostensibly a worker. He's from a poor
Mhm.
upbringing, and yet because he's part of the clergy, he is immediately folded into the elite's table when he gets up to Forsberg or whatever it's called.
Quick note, by the
Mhm.
way, since it's come up a couple of times, and Timo, you had mentioned it, where we're sort of dropped into this conversation between Heinrich and his grandfather. Worth noting that this film is technically an edited down version of a 6-hour like TV miniseries,
Yeah.
by the same name. So makes it all the more impressive as a storytelling editing feat that this
Mhm.
is half the length of what could be considered the full story of The Best Intentions, and it's still quite cogent and coherent.
Yeah.
And also, obviously, interesting because Ingmar Bergman, with things like Fanny and Alexander or Scenes from a Marriage, did the very same thing. Whereas there's the full story that aired on television, and then like a 3.5 hour long film that is an edited down version of that.
For theatrical release.
For theatrical
Which-
release, that's obviously at this point, I would say, in modern cinematic history, regarded as like, oh, that's the thing, instead
Yeah.
of watching the 6-hour TV
Yeah.
miniseries.
And that's also
Mhm.
just something that not only just isn't really done, obviously isn't done in modern times, but
Mhm.
has basically never been done to like immense success in American
Yeah.
culture. It's
Yeah.
interesting that that was something that Ingmar Bergman specifically was able to make happen a bunch of times, because also just doing a little bit of research, apparently this was the most expensive Swedish film production
Wow.
ever.
Yeah.
Makes
It-
sense when you realize that it was like they probably shot like 20 hours worth of footage that they then cut down to 6, that they then
Yeah.
cut down to 3. But I think that the class conflict is very interesting when you mention like the way that it's like rooted into all of the characters in a way that if you do a little bit of thinking, you realize it's there. Because one of the things
Oh
that
my
I found
god,
most
if you do a little bit of thinking, you realize the
I
class
know,
conflict is within
I
all
know.
of us, Tucker.
dude, that I was one of the most confusing and strange elements of this film while I was watching it was, why does every character hate this relationship? And that was kind of the reason why I started calling it an anti-romance film. I was like, no one wants this to happen.
That's a
And
really
And like I feel like the
No
main
one's rooting
characters
for
are
him.
doing this out of like spite for the people around them.
Well, that's a
which is very
great guiding
bizarre.
question, though.
Well,
What did
yeah,
you discover
but-
when you asked that to yourself?
I said self. I said
What'd you
self.
say yourself?
I said self. I'm listening to Timo Nelson explain about the grandfather thing, and then how Heinrich's mother carries this trauma from her mother.
Mhm.
I don't really know exactly what the family history structure was for Heinrich, so
Not
little bit
super
shaky.
clear.
Gotta watch the 6-hour version.
Yeah,
for that,
we're gonna
right?
have
Actually,
to review that
probably.
later.
Probably, almost certainly.
but in that it does make sense when you think about the way that she has like a visceral reaction to Anna being Heinrich's lover, and that she learns that Anna is from a family of money, and she like cries, and she
Mhm.
like prays that I hope this ends. Like I want her to like die, or what? She said something along those lines, like
Yeah, I had written it down. Hang on, let me find it. I'm very used to that.
Heinrich, mother.
Heinrich's mother doesn't like Anna, but asks God to punish. Heinrich's mother asks God to punish her if it's purely out of spite, because she's like,
Yeah.
I got a bad feeling about this. I want you to break them up somehow. Kill her if you need to. But also, if this is just me projecting, if
Smote me.
if it just smote me.
Smote me
exactly.
if I'm hater.
Smote me if I'm just being a hater, God,
Yeah.
is what she basically says.
Yeah, but it's interesting when you think about that context of this is never brought up in that scene. You have to think all the way back to the frankly very disconnected opening scene in which you're like, oh, she doesn't like affluent people, and to your point, Timo, she and obviously Heinrich as well hold this like deep within them on an even more subconscious level of Anna's never done anything wrong to her, and to her eyes and to the conversations she's had, she's a totally lovely person. They're looking at a baby book and they're like, oh, we're going to build our life together. But because of the history that she has, it makes a lot of sense why, well, it emotionally makes a lot of sense and narratively makes a lot of sense. Logically, that's a different thing. But
I
why
would
she
say
would
that this
react
movie
that
does
way.
not operate on a very logical
No.
level at all. This
No.
movie is primarily
Hey,
interested
is
in your
love logical? You know,
No, it's
is
not.
your
No, it is
care
not.
for another human being logical?
No.
I think an interesting plot thread to inform this conversation is the introduction of Petrus,
Mhm.
who is the most sickly boy that's ever been in a movie.
Just
Oh
a
my
ghoul,
God.
just a ghoul of a little boy.
guys, his hair. How
One
can he
interesting thing about him, like visually, is
Uh-huh.
that he's always got like streaks of red coming out of his nose, and it's not like his nose has been recently bleeding. It's like he's just like that.
No,
Yeah.
that's just you could just
He's
see every
he's
vein
just
on this young
sniffly.
boy.
He's-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, he lives in the coldest climate known to man, where every room is also
Clearly
always
he does.
like
He lives in
ice
Sweden.
blocks.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
He's interesting because I think he reveals something about Anna.
Yep.
He reveals that Anna holds the same prejudices
Yeah.
that the other characters do. in
She
lot
has
of
a
ways.
limit to her acceptance of people who are quote unquote lower than her.
There's even, I think, an implication that she views Petrus as like a challenge to her family, because there's a moment when when Dog has gotten into bed with Petrus and they're like sleeping in the same bed,
Mhm.
and she gets very angry about this, and she comes and she takes her son out of bed and puts him in his bed, closes this curtain, this like really nice silk curtain,
Mhm.
slams the doors like, we gotta get this fucking other kid out of our house.
You gotta get him out of here.
And now the intuition ended up being right because they tried to drown the child in the river.
Well, yes, but
Except-
chicken
except-
or egg, you know.
Chicken or egg, I think, because that
yeah,
cut to them. The parents are in the bed. They're discussing how they're going to be getting rid of Petrus. They're going to take him back to the family that beats him and hates him. And then you cut, and he's like standing.
Yeah,
there
he's
in
just
the
standing
hall.
there in the
He's just
doorway,
standing
yeah.
there, and
Crazy.
like it was like honestly, out of a film that does not have like any like major like heart dropping edits, this is the one, and
Yeah.
it's just like
Absolutely.
I was like, oh my god.
I mean, frankly, the only moment of like cinematic editing tension is then like the next morning when he's running down to the frozen
He's
water.
gonna
I'm like,
drown
I'm
the
like,
little boy.
I'm like, whoa! This movie is supposed to have fights, yes, but it's up to this point. It's like it's very,
Yeah.
it's relaxed.
mellow.
it takes its time
mellow.
with even
placid.
its biggest conflict.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the? This is some serious shit that's happening.
Yeah.
and I think that's such an interesting plot thread, because what we know about Anna from the scene discussing their wedding is that she has a sort of ordered and idealized version of what life is and
Mhm.
should be, and I think that her complete rejection of Petrus is in some ways a reflection of that, and her I think continually encroaching frustration and anger about the life, the sort of ad hoc life that has been put together for her by Henrik. And I think it's important to note, because I feel like some of our comments have made it sound like Henrik is a more sympathetic character, or Anna is more of like a drag. I don't know what the right word is, and is the case.
Party pooper.
I think the film does a good job of illustrating the deep moral flaws with Henrik through how oppressive he is in the narrative.
Of course.
And I think that then when she does snap and the response is physical abuse from Henrik,
Mhm.
it becomes very obvious that the even though this is not a film solely from the POV of Henrik dominates the life of these people.
Oh yeah. So because obviously the power dynamic is interesting, because most of the time when we're talking about rich character, poor character, each character is painted in a unsympathetic or sympathetic light, respectively.
Mhm.
Thank you. But to this end, I mean, I think it speaks to the time period, and also, you know, the dynamic that Ingmar Bergman ended up, you know, growing up in, wherein, yes, his father is from a lower class family and a lower class position, but because Anna's mother eventually allowed her to get married to Heinrich, he is now like the patriarch of the family. Like, she does go back to her mother at a certain point, but that is obviously a very socially uncouth thing to do. Like, when she agrees to marry him, he's like, we're gonna go up to a rickety old shack in the North Country. I'm gonna be a country priest.
The oldest, dustiest house ever built by humankind.
It falls apart if you even look at it the wrong way. And you're gonna be my wife, and you're gonna like hang the clothes out to dry and cook and do the
You're
dishes
going
and
to
everything.
birth my 5 children and
Exactly. It's like she submits herself to this, very obviously very antiquated patriarchal way of living because she has this just innate love for Heinrich, despite their differences or the arguments or altercations that they get into.
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting that the film takes the turn into Heinrich being like making like explicit statements about he wants her to be a certain way and things like that, because I don't feel that is apparent necessarily through Heinrich's personality for the majority of the film. The majority of the film actually takes place before they move to the smaller village.
Before they get married.
They're separated. They're living separately. They're getting to know one another. They're in and out of, are we going to be together or not? But Heinrich, for the majority of the runtime of the film, is a very understated character. He's quiet in the back of these big family gatherings.
They did describe him as like sweet but shy right at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I almost don't necessarily view him in the way that you did as like dominant to the narrative, because he's like dominant for the majority of the runtime in like this really like subtle way of like he's just kind of like a little polite guy who wants to be a pastor. And then there is sort of this shift where the power goes to his head and he gets what he wants in terms of a relationship, and he realizes that he does have power and he is going to be changing the lives of people around him. And that's an interesting character change. I don't know if I love it too much, because I do think that for the majority of the film, he is pretty much set up as a guy that lets other people like walk all over him and stuff. And so maybe it does make sense in terms of like a sudden change of him just like be like, I can't take this anymore. Like I need to have some sense of control. But it's a pretty sudden thing.
He's a guy that lets himself be walked all over. So. I mean, I'm just reminded of that scene when he after spending a week with Anna's family in Uppsala at the country house, he basically just says to the mother, like, you don't like me, you don't want me around here, and in very nice like old-timey polite
but then
speak.
She like tells him what to do and he immediately does it, like hard cut to he has already done it.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think that that's what that is implying. I think that he is at that point angry and has left the situation. Sure. There's nothing more he can do. I think what's interesting about the beginning of the narrative, and it goes back to Tanner's point about these sort of period political dynamics, ultimately, Heinrich is a massive threat at the beginning of the film. The first half of the film is in a lot of ways reconciling with this. We spend a lot of time with Anna's parents as they try to navigate how they're going to keep them apart, because Heinrich is seen as a direct political, social challenge to their life. And as we come to later learn, because of his political worldview, you can make some sort of larger point about their politics as these aristocratic figures and his politics as well. But I think that even if you're just looking at a character level, the first half of the movie is entirely concerned with keeping them apart. We also know from the beginning that he is not a particularly moral person. He said that Frida was a past lover to Anna, but then continues to see Frida. And he clearly has some sort of, I know there's a particular word for like a cult, like a figure with a cult-like attraction.
Sure.
When Frida brings Anna to the diner, or it's not even a diner, it's a very nice ballroom restaurant they eat in, she is so captured by his magnitude that she simply wants his happiness. I think that there's never a sense that this is a meek person. This is a person that attracts the attention of women. It's a person that is a challenge to aristocracy.
Really good idea to bring up that scene, Abram, because that is such a just to think about this character now. What is it about Henrik that like has his older girlfriend be like basically dumping herself for the other girl? Like, that is a really like.
Well, he clearly doesn't want me anymore, so the least you could do is try and make him happy.
Yeah. Well, the reason I disagree with that is in terms of him not coming off as meek, or at least narratively not coming off as meek, is because I do think that most of the characters, while they treat him socially as a threat, I think that's more his social position and not his personality, because I'm specifically focusing in on this first half of the film. We all recognize that, okay, once he becomes a pastor. There's a different tenor, but he like stumbles in awkwardly to the dinner and like sits quietly in the back and like just like leaves quietly, and then his old lover is like, oh, he's just kind of like a quiet, shy guy, and we're always describing him as shy, and so maybe it's just the inundation of everyone saying that's how he was. But from what I remember of the film, he's just always, for the first part of the film, he's just kind of there in the background. He's not like making any big statements. He's not making any conflict. He's always like, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to like get you guys upset.
I certainly think that he's conflict averse, but that doesn't mean that he isn't, you know,
he's Swedish. Of course he's conflict averse.
Very good point, Timo. But I just don't think that means that he is like this meek, whatever goes kind of character. I think he does have, we had mentioned it earlier, he has this, and I think it's Froller's performance as well, he has this barely concealed sense of like, not like he's a Machiavellian villain or anything like that, but that he is more intelligent than he is letting on.
Yeah.
That he perhaps does want to get his way, and that he is a deeply hurt person and will hurt others. I mean, what I had been saying earlier about his like hell-bent intent on like being miserable and perhaps inflicting misery on others.
I also think it's important that I think the ultimate trump to the idea of him being a meek person is that when confronted by his grandfather's offer of not only reconciliation with his grandmother, but a monthly allowance and home for himself, he basically says, "Go fuck yourself. Grandma can die. I don't care."
Yeah.
I mean, that is about the antithesis, I would say.
I agree, but that is also not necessarily that energy is not reflected in the next 90+ minutes of the film. I think it's like he can be pushed to that.
I think it's because he's just in a very different context.
Absolutely.
He's not talking,
very important.
He's not talking to his grandfather. He is talking to very wealthy people
that he does not know.
That he does not know.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit of a climberism in his character too, and in a strivingness, a trying to go to, clearly I think a lot of characters in this time period are motivated by class mobility. Like he's wanting to move up. It's a better life for himself to be in the church, to be working for them, and to marry into a rich family is a way to certainly improve your living conditions. And so there's also, I think that I think that a lot of the later elements of the film actually go against that. Like he really is trying to help what looks like the common man and is much more, I guess, egalitarian, it seems. But I think that there is that conflict within him that he definitely wants to live a nice life, and he definitely wants to have money and have these things that marrying Anna will give him. And I also think that
I don't know if I agree with that though, because I don't think it's ever portrayed through their actions in their relationship or any of the family around Anna, especially, that is going to be even a possible outcome of if he marries into this, that he will have money and have a house and have more power. He almost seems to be rejecting that and trying to drag Anna down to his level of, yeah, you're like this, but I don't want you to be like this, and so we're going to live in a shitty rundown house, and we're going to like just help other people with what we have. Like he doesn't take any mobility from that. In fact, I would say it is only him becoming a pastor that increases his social mobility. Anyway. It's not the marriage.
Same thing as him rejecting the job at the hospital from the Queen.
And rejecting the money from his grandfather.
Exactly. I want to talk. Oh, sorry.
Well, just one other scene I want to raise. Because I think that ultimately the reason he's an interesting character is because he embodies all of these qualities.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. Yeah.
I mean, I think of the scene Nordston.
Nordensson. I've been getting it wrong too.
There's a very, very compelling scene where there's this sort of C plot where he is confirming Nordenson's children behind Nordenson's back.
Yeah.
And Nordensson arrives.
This is a really important scene, actually.
Yeah, it's a great scene.
He arrives to the class in the chapel and has a standoff with Henrik over taking his daughters out of the class. Mm-hmm. And we see here that I think, a lot of different dimensions of Henrik's character.
Yeah.
He is attempting to exert his position over Nordenson, but doesn't fully. He does acquiesce.
Yeah.
And so I think in that we see a couple of things. We see his power, but we also see, to Timo's point, an understanding that you can't totally upset the apple cart. This is a man of an importance that I can't cross at a certain point.
Yeah.
So he lets
Well,
the
then he
daughters-
does cross and says some choice words, and then that basically ruins his life.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, because we then have the whole scene in the sewing bee where we come to learn all of the issues that amount from this.
How similar is that to a spelling bee?
Well, they're not spelling, so I would say fairly
Very
different.
There are bees involved, though, as I understand it, though.
Yes.
I think
Let's get Jerry Seinfeld on this.
Yeah.
I think that part of what makes Henrik a nefarious character in some ways is that a lot of the power he exercises is over his wife, and he can't fully exercise over the other men in the film around him. And I think that this is sort of like a normalized gender hierarchy. I think an interesting editing choice in the film is that we see Anna pregnant, and then we cut and the baby is already birthed and healthy and like lying in the bed. And it's ultimately not of a concern to the narrative what Anna goes through or the practicalities of the birth in this far north town or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just she is supposed to have the kid. She has the kid. The kid is now
And the kid is frankly like barely important. Like we don't
Well,
learn
it's
his
not.
name till like way longer.
It's not Ingmar Bergman, so who
That's true.
cares?
That's a
I
great
mean,
point.
what's up,
But-
dog?
But what I think is interesting about the gender dynamic of this film is that outside of Max von Sydow, who's funny and he's got some funny little lines, and I'm like, hey, I like him. There's really no other like well-defined male characters in this film. All the other characters that get like conflict and conversation are mothers mostly. It's Anna, it's her mother, it's his mother, and like all the other guys are just like kind of like in and out of the scenes, and you go like 50 minutes without seeing them, they'll show up and go like, oh hey, it's like her brother.
I
or
think
like
it's probably a sort of metaphor for Heinrich's ascension to the position of like the key patriarch of the narrative and of Anna's life. Speaking of, talk a lot about Heinrich. I want to talk about Anna. I think that Pernilla August gives the better performance in the film.
Yeah.
And it's a performance that we've seen in certain respects to a number of times. The wife who is, quite outgoing, quite outspoken, who eventually just gets ground down by the, restrictive time period that she exists in. But I think what Pernilla August does is she infuses it with a sense of humanity that not a lot of other performers have in roles like this. There are plenty of women who just get handed this put upon wife role, and they do a good job. But what Pernilla August really does with her role as Anna is really first of all, she's given 3 hours to have this transformation, and it ebbs and flows as their relationship does. I mean, there's a point in the film where she has she gets like tuberculosis.
Yeah.
And then she has to like go away from it. But all the while she has this, what have we been talking about, this innate sense of love for Heinrich, despite all of it, despite their arguments and everything. She is secretly writing letters to him that her mother and father discover. And so it's just a lot more complexity that is discussed in the film, I think, than perhaps Heinrich. So I mean, obviously we just dug into all the subtext behind Heinrich's complexity, but Anna's is really there in the text of the film.
Yeah, because she's the more explicit character.
Of course.
She shares her emotion on her sleeve more often than not, and it usually gets people mad at her.
Yes.
Mostly her family,
Yes.
mostly Heinrich. And I think that she's an interesting character because I think she becomes the put upon wife role.
Yes.
But she is not that for the majority of the film, and I think that's why it feels even more awkward once the roles are reversed, because she's the one kind of commanding the direction of their relationship for the first part of the film.
She admits
she's the
to
one
being the seducer right at the start.
Yeah. And she's the one that asks for an engagement and asks for a kiss for the first time and comes into his room and comes upon him and like asks him to go out. And even in, I think, a very key moment where this, I think, is the last moment where she really commands their dynamic is when she first comes back to Heinrich after undisclosed amount of time, but a very long time, I think over a year or something like that.
Mhm.
And she comes back and she's like, "Hey, all right, we're back. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this. You're gonna go here. We're gonna get married. We're gonna have a kid. We're gonna make sure that you're a pastor." And it's a very, I think, disarming scene in that we've just spent the last 20 odd minutes of them over a year of in-world time separated, unsure of what's going to happen, mostly in that time period focused in on her parents who are discussing of like, oh, this is not good.
I mean,
but then she goes back and she's like, boom, here's the plan. I've been thinking about this. I haven't seen you in a year and a half, but let's do it. Bam.
I've been up in the Italian Alps, almost dying for a year.
Here's a complication to that whole little bit there at the end. To add in, put this in your gender dynamic stew, if you will. The reason...
How'd you know I was cooking that, Timo?
The reason...
He smelled it.
The reason that Anna ends up being able to like be released from the control of her mother, who's keeping her from getting back with Henrik, is because her father dies, and that element of patriarchal control is lost in the family, and that control is lapsed. And so then it's a lot easier for Anna's mother to give in to her demands and to give in to what her daughter really wants and is really vocal to her about wanting. And I think that's just another interesting little twist there, that everyone's life is in this movie completely affected by who has power over what.
Yeah. Well, Max von Sydow is an interesting character because he is, I think, also he's a surprisingly gentle patriarchal figure, but he still definitely has that presence. And I think one of the most interesting and kind of uncomfortable moments in the film is when he gets out of his chair. He's like had a funny little nap and he's like said something goofy and he gets out of the chair and everyone's like waiting, like ready to like bow to him and be like, yes, father, I hope you had a good nap. Yes. And
well, I mean, that's just everyone's average reaction to Max von Sydow.
Yeah. And also that's just how it is in Sweden.
Exactly.
But he's a very gentle character. He is the one that understands Anna the best.
Is it the opening scene where their
opening scene
opening scene is like she wakes him up.
Yes. She blows on his face a little bit. He's like, "Oh, I had a dream."
Oh, father, you must not wear your glasses on your head. Yes. They'll fall off your face and break.
But I think he's an interesting male figure in this film because again, he has that patriarchal presence of everyone really respects him and wants to make sure that they're not upsetting him. But he also is a very gentle guy, and she's always coming to him with her problems and like crying on his shoulder. He's like, there, I'll be there for you, my child.
To circle back, I mean, I think that the passing of the torch of the patriarchal figure is obviously very apparent in the film, but to circle back, a note I had on Anna's character and how she is she has to weather all the storm of all the these passing of torches, whether it be from patriarchal figure or from her palatial estate and her summer home to this wooded cabin up in the North Country, or in the scene where she meets Heinrich's mother for the first time, which is where I have this note. She has to weather these very uncomfortable moments just because of where she came from, and she has no real power now anymore. It's part of this dynamic of where she is giving it up unwillingly.
Yeah.
Heinrich's mother says to her, she gives her a gift, which is customary, and she says, "Well, it's a simple gift. I'm sure you're used to much better." And what? First of all, you're like, "What the fuck, Heinrich mother, whatever your name is."
So passive aggressive, bro.
It's I mean, and we just got done with the scene where she's like, "Hey, if you could kill this woman, that'd be nice." God, that is. And we cut to the reaction on Anna's face on August, Pernilla August's face, and she's like, "Okay, thanks, I guess." And there are multiple moments like that where she has to she's a fish out of water, but not in a comedic sense, in a sense that she kind of is very not used to this sort of scenario, and she's trying to make the best of it and maintain her sense of identity in a world that is immediately and always trying to beat her down, shape her into a form of what the idealized priest's wife is. In any case, I was just gonna see if I had any other notes.
I've got one more thing to remark about, then I've exhausted my ability to analyze.
Okay.
I think my criticism of the film.
Okay.
I've got one big criticism of the film, and for me, it's the ending. And by ending, I mean maybe the last 25 minutes or so.
Mhm.
Because I became more and more conscious of the dwindling amount of screen time. And while I think we get to an intriguing place with our characters in terms of their relationship and everything, I think where and this could, because I didn't know about the whole miniseries thing, this could be a issue with the choices made in the editing room, but I feel like there is a sort of indictment of Henrik's character when he has to navigate being in the town without Anna and the wanting for Anna to return that is really not put upon that much.
No, it's
and
barely given any screen time.
yeah, and there's
It almost feels like an accident that it's in there. You're like, oh, I thought we were supposed to be with Pernilla August, and it's like, oh, what's he up to? Oops, and then we like cut back to that.
I think it's really important that we have this this sense that people are worried about Henrik. It's offered that he comes and live with the pastor or the priest. Is it the priest or the pastor that offers for him to go live with them?
Maybe it's
He's one.
yet a secret third option, the Reverend.
So
That's what it was. That was the word.
Okay.
That was the word. I couldn't remember the word.
the Popa.
So there is a lot of implication here about how the culture in this town is shifting. And I think, like I said at the very beginning of our discussion, one of the things I really enjoyed about the film, despite having to acclimate to it, is the runtime, because I felt like we really got into the culture of the town and the characters and everything. And I think we lose that at the end. So that was that's my big issue with the film, I would say.
Okay.
I think it's a pacing thing because I think the slow parts are really that first 2/3 of the film before they move to the smaller town, where I'm like, oh, this is the movie that we've been building to. I'm like, him being the pastor, then building up this house. It feels like that would be where the movie started, but we got an entire other, well more than a movie's worth of a very slow burn, and I think in some ways a little bit repetitive. Will they, won't they? And it's compelling in an interesting way in terms of getting to know their class histories and their personalities more deeply. But I do think that is the less interesting part of the movie. But it's significantly more time is spent on they're just kind of we kind of go in a circle a couple of times of like, we'll come back together, and then we actually hate each other.
It gets a little trite at times, but I think it is key to the push and pull dynamic.
There's
that we've
like
been
the
talking
line
about.
like "I never want to see you again" is yelled by Henrik like 3 or 4 times. In the film.
Yes, well, hey, it's
and
a
Anna
toxic
says, "I will
relationship.
never come back to you," like 3 or 4 times.
We'll see about that. We'll see in a couple months.
And then I do think that I actually agree on the ending with the literal ending of the last scene of them coming together.
Oh, the park benches.
Because it I don't know. Actually, maybe I like it.
I have a note here.
It's like
I like it.
bitter sweet, or it's like a hauntingly saccharine moment.
Yes.
Of like, oh, all I want to do is come back together. And again, I think this is again leading back to me saying that Heinrich is a very like simple, like kind of quiet character. He kind of like shuffles up quietly and he's like, hey, I've been feeling real bad about all this. I kind of just came up here on a whim. And then they kind of have this conversation. It's like, all I want to do is move back in together. And then the movie ends. I'm like, ooh,
I think there's more to it than that.
I think what we're sort of describing, all of us in roundabout senses, is that Heinrich, in a lot of ways, says things that an abusive husband or boyfriend will say in a lot of contexts. So it's not that he's like, he's taking his hat in his hands. He's doing
I think he's portraying him exactly. That's my point. He's portraying himself in that way, but there is the background knowledge of he actually has a plan.
Yes.
That's my point with all of this.
Then I agree.
Yeah, I think it's also visually complicated by the fact that they are on different benches.
Yeah.
There's a
very odd. There's 2 benches in the middle of the field next to each
right
other.
next to each other.
There's
Who put those there?
What those benches need is one arm in the middle, just so
hostile architecture joke
for people to use, put their arms on, right, guys? Anyway,
With really long arms.
yeah. I have a collection of other notes here. They are about the ending. We want to talk a little bit more about it. I guess this happens as they are splitting up, but it gets
Which time?
Well, the last time.
Okay.
The last time when Heinrich's one of his first thoughts about Anna leaving is that, oh, your mother won, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of goes back to this thing of like our characters might be doing things out of a spite for their own parents and for each other's parents.
Well, and also for each other, because I think that this goes back to my initial point about what makes this film feel very distinct, is that there are these moments where the veneer is ripped off incredibly quickly. Like one tiny thing that sometimes I don't even really understand what the conflict is, and then they're just at each other's throats and they're making these insults. It feels like there can just be this snap decision of they've been waiting to say this insulting thing, or and there's a lot of passive aggressiveness of, oh, well, you said this, then I'm going to say this like ridiculous thing in response. And that is, I feel like it's always underneath the surface of both of these characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, the one of the final lines of the film is that you know, he can apologize all he wants, but you know, I thought it was just a beautiful line. That those are banal words for something so important. Which I don't know. Yeah, just an interesting line there. And then you can learn all about what happened after this with the sequel Fanny and Alexander, which is about young Igmar cutting it up in the Swedish countryside.
All right, I just put in my score.
Let me give you gentlemen the Palm details here, and then I have
Yeah.
to load up a different spreadsheet actually. So this film won the Palme d'Or at the 1992 Palm Film Festival, Cannes Film Festival, not Palm Film
Oh,
Festival.
apparently it's Can.
Cannes, I don't know. You say it with different accents. That's what
We
language
say
is.
every character's name wrong for
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
review we do.
No, but I feel like we should come to a pretty concrete decision on the topic of our show. Is it Can or is it Can? I heard recently that I was saying it wrong. It was actually Can.
Who said that?
Can.
French
My-
guy?
My mother.
Wow.
Ah.
Mom's not French, is she?
We will
No.
litigate this
She
topic,
doesn't know French.
and we will
Oh.
return with our
And she went there.
delegated
That's why
solution.
she told me.
Oh.
Because I told her we were reviewing them. She's like, oh, I went to Can. And it's pronounced Can. I'm
Uh.
like, oh.
Yeah.
Maybe it is pronounced.
It's, you know,
can.
it's different accents. You know, but we are allowed to have American accents when we say things.
We're
Right?
going
Well, I feel
over
like
to
Con, though,
France
is
and
us
Sweden and-
putting a French accent on it.
How
I
about
feel
we
like-
hear the palm details?
Yeah, how about the palm details? Okay. Well, speaking of French people, and not very good guys at that. The jury president this year was Gerard Depardieu. Shitty guy, real bad guy. Anyway, other people on the jury this year included UK filmmaker John Boorman, Pedro Almodovar, Spanish filmmaker, and everyone's favorite Jamie Lee Curtis was on the jury
Oh.
this
In
year.
92? Interesting.
I don't like her anymore. She said she doesn't like Gen Z.
Well, hey, fair. But she did dress up as a character from World of Warcraft at BlizzCon one time.
Did she really?
Yeah, she did.
How
Yeah.
did they get Jamie Lee Curtis to go to BlizzCon?
She likes video games.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know.
Well, she's in Borderlands.
I think one of her kids likes video
Yeah.
games.
Maybe that's why she's in Borderlands.
Maybe. Anyway, other films in competition this year that the best intentions beat out. This might anger some people. Here's some beloved films here. First of all, one that I hadn't really heard of, but a Sidney Lumet film, A Stranger Among Us. Also in the competition, these are the beloved ones I was talking about. Paul Verhoeven's Basic Instinct.
That's why she was there. Oh, no, sorry. No, I'm thinking of
You're thinking of True Lies.
True Lies. Oh,
Yeah.
shit.
Mm.
I get those films mixed up. I
Yeah.
don't know why.
The
Sorry.
Player by Robert Altman.
Oh,
And
that's a great
Twin
movie.
Peaks Fire Walk with Me from David
Oh,
Lynch.
another crazy fucking good movie. That movie's something else.
This is something else. All
It really is something.
right,
else.
ready?
Ready?
Hang on.
Well,
Back it up.
I'll kind
There you
of
go.
give
Now I'm
my
ready.
final thought here, and that
Go for it.
the literariness of this film really strikes home in that the overarching theme is not super clear to me, but all the little individual themes, all the little individual moments are very clear to me and very well executed. And so, while filmically that's so frustrating, literarily I think that's actually quite cool. And so I guess I'm neither pleased nor displeased with that, and you'll see it with my score.
Here's the overarching theme.
Here we
Don't
go.
move to Sweden.
Don't move to
True.
Sweden. Uppsala's
Actually,
a
I've been to Sweden. It's very
Uppsala is
nice.
a bad place with bad people in it.
I've actually been to Uppsala and it's cool.
I think
I hate to
Sweden's a
say.
pretty cool place. Okay. Ready
Scores?
for the scores? Beep, boop, 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 boop,
Uh-oh, discard changes. That's not what I want to do. There we go.
Okay. We have a number. It is 7.7, which is going to put this
Oh.
film below The Ballad of Narayama and above A Man and a Woman at spot number 8 on our list. The point breakdown is I gave it a 6.6, then Tanner gave it a 7.8, Tucker gave it a 7.9, and then Abram gave it an 8.5. So there you have it.
Truly.
Right on.
We gave this film the best intentions of a review.
Yeah. What?
Yeah,
We had the
approached-
best intentions coming in.
Yes,
Yeah, we approached it with the
that's
best
a
intentions.
bit more grammatically
didn't.
sensible.
No.
Oh,
I had the worst intentions.
What?
Evil Ingmar Bergman.
Evil Billy August would be like the worst. Okay, Abram, I gotta ask, what is Pernilla August better in, this or Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace?
She gives such a fucking bizarre performance in the Phantom Menace.
It's so fucking weird that she's in this, married to two-time Palme d'Or winner Billy August, and she's also like, yeah, I'll be Anakin. I'll be Darth Vader's mom in those Star Wars movies. Why not?
Well, being in the Phantom Menace is
She's
awesome.
not in like any other American films.
I mean, the Phantom Menace
Also,
is.
she's barely in that movie.
I mean,
Shmi Skywalker is not a major
she's
part.
not a major part, but
The bottom line is the Phantom Menace is a really good movie, and time will make that clearer and clearer to people.
well,
That's
Wow.
the bottom
we
line.
need John Tour to weigh in on this.
yeah.
On
That's
his
true.
journey.
He might have actually watched it. Like, he might have seen it in theaters. To be completely honest.
Yeah.
He could have been
It's,
sitting next to me.
oh my god, you would never would have known.
No, he lives in another country, doesn't he?
We don't know what he looks like. He could have been here visiting.
That's a good
Could have
point.
flown all the way here.
Tanner,
All right.
start singing
Yes.
before these fools say something else crazy.
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
The timing's like so perfect on that. Wheels deal
Every time.
is
Nailed it every
number
time.
79.
Well, that's gonna be a recent one too.
Is that
79 is going to give us the winner from 2012, so very, very recent.
Okay.
Okay.
And this is a film starring Jean-Louis Trintignant, Emmanuel Riva, Isabelle Huppert, and directed by Michael Haneke.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is Amour.
Oh,
Best Picture nominee.
Best Picture nominee.
Yeah, but I think it's the last Best Picture nominee I need to watch from 2012.
Sure, why not?
Wait, no, and
How do you
War-
how do you
Warhorse or that's
how do you
2011?
spell
That's
that title
2011.
again?
Amour. It's just love.
Oh,
No,
it's
it's
love.
French.
Amour.
What's the summary? What's the runtime?
All right,
Mm.
it's
A little
about
over 2 hours.
It's about old people, but it's
It's about old people.
it's about dementia or Alzheimer's, I think. But George and Anne are in their 80s. They are cultivated, retired music teachers. Their daughter, who is also a musician, lives abroad with her family. One day, Anne has a stroke, and the couple's bond of love is severely tested.
Yeah, that's a Palme d'Or winner.
Mm-hmm.
Number 237 on the Letterboxd Top 250.
What's the Letterboxd average? What's the IMDb score?
Well, it's in the top 250 highest rated. films
4.2 on
Letterboxd.
Letterboxd.
What's the
Wow.
critic score? What's the top critic score?
I'll look up all this and more.
What's the audience
Why do
score?
you care?
How many verified audience reviews are there?
How many thumbs up did it get from Roger Ebert?
How many scrabbles?
How many scrabbles does it have on Last
If
FM?
you guys recall to the previous French film that we watched, it also starred Jean-Louis Trintignant from A Man and a Woman.
Ah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
hey, how about that?
Yeah.
We're learning something here. We're connecting
Oh
the
my-
dots. Our synapses are fusing.
Well,
That's the
we
sound it makes.
we're gonna fuse even more synapses next week when we talk about Amour. This anti-love film will.
Well,
then-
their synapses are diffusing because they have dementia.
Oh,
Oh,
Well, she had a
dear.
stroke or something. I don't know.
Oh,
if
You
that
said it
is-
was dementia.
I thought it was. I
That's-
was wrong. It was
Let's
a
end the
stroke.
episode.
thank you guys for discussing this majorly long but pretty interesting film. And we came to a pretty good conclusion. I feel like my understanding. This is a good episode of increasing my understanding as we discuss about the film. And sometimes you just need to talk about it to figure out what's going on in a movie. Well,
Connect those synapses.
yeah.
Mhm.
Next week we talk about Amour, love again. Good time to be romantic on
No,
Quest,
that's a
I
different
guess.
movie.
What?
I think this one's gonna have a little heartbreak in it. That's just the vibe I'm getting. But we'll find out.
We'll find out. Stay tuned here on Backlot Banter. As I always say, stay cool, keep warm. Peace.